Amazon Web Services Webcast, Getting Started with AWS. This how-to webinar, we're going to cover a few core services with AWS with a live demonstration. In your control panel of the GoToWebinar tools, you can have the Q&A function when you can submit questions anytime, and our presenter, Chris, will address them at the end of the webinar. Our presenter, Chris Kaiser, is the solution architect at AWS in IC Partner Group. Chris has been with AWS for 18 months. So before we start the actual webinar, I'd like to understand what kind of operating systems are you using, which can help us adjust our presentation a little bit. So please stand by while I launch this poll question. Okay, so our poll questions, yes, let's wait for a moment and let me launch it. So right now on your screen, you should have the questions like what operating system are you using? Please make a choice, click on Linux, or Windows, or other if I miss your operating system. Okay, we have lots of votes coming. I'll give it a couple more seconds for people to submit their votes. Great. So we can see that about 30% of people using Linux and 70% using Windows and a couple of percent using other. Great. Okay, so right now I'm going to pass the floor to Chris, who are going to present today's webinar. Chris, you have the floor.
Great, thank you, Bowen. It's a pleasure today to have an opportunity to talk to you about getting started with Amazon Web Services. Our agenda for today, we're going to cover some of the fundamental pillars of Amazon Web Services. Then we're going to spend most of our time actually doing a walkthrough where we go through the console to create a bunch of different building block type services and show you how to get some instances up and running and accessible in Amazon Web Services. We'll then go ahead and follow up with a question and answer section. So Amazon Web Services has a complete set of services for building solutions from simple static websites to really complex, distributed, massive scale global applications like Netflix and Pinterest. You can create instances only for when you need them without any IT resource investment. This eliminates the delays and manpower to create and deploy resources, and it makes it easy to create resources that will be used for just a short period of time and then shut down. Well, what does this come through in terms of benefits? One of the things we like to talk about at Amazon Web Services is eliminating undifferentiated heavy lifting. Now, what does it we mean by that? There are a lot of things that your organization does that they have to do in order to just keep the lights on and keep the business running. It doesn't really differentiate anything about your business. Some examples of things like this are racking and stacking servers, installing and patching operating systems, going ahead and creating databases and maintaining databases, creating data warehouses and maintaining those as well, doing all the network configuration. These are things that you have to do in order to keep the business running, but really they don't make your business any better. If you could have the resources that you're dedicating to that, instead look at doing things like increasing the agility of your organization, thinking about policies and procedures that would just make your organization more responsive, that would be a lot better. Another thing that is a big benefit is the ability to go global in minutes. Anyone that's deployed their application globally knows that this is a major cost and effort undertaking. And with Amazon Web Services, there are services in 9 different regions across the globe. So you can deploy virtually anywhere in the world and be ready to go in minutes. Not only can you do that in our 9 regions, we also have edge caching in over 40 different locations, so you have responsive applications. And we have capabilities that make it really easy for you to copy things like disk images and what we call Amazon machine images, which are really your operating system images, and database backups, your data warehouse backups across regions. And we make it really easy as well for you to operate your systems across region and maintain them. All this really results in a faster time to market. It lets you do things that typically you may not be able to do because of the effort and cost involved in it. Things like A/B testing, where you essentially spin up an environment that's like side by side, where you want to test out some new things. And if they go really well, you want to keep that system up and running. And if they don't, you want to shut down and go back to your main system for all of your users. Scenarios like that are just made much easier when you use Amazon Web Services. Another core capability is removing the need to guess about capacity. You can essentially get the capacity when you need it. And we have capabilities like auto-scale groups that make it really easy for you to do this. So what does that mean to your business? Well, today when you deploy a service or an application, you really need to provision for your peak load. Not only do you have to provision for your peak load, but you want to make sure that you never actually cross your peak load, so you really provision essentially for your peak load plus some margin. When it comes to running it on the cloud, though, you can just scale out when you have your peak load and scale back when you don't. So you avoid all that capital investment, and you only pay for what you actually use. So by removing this undifferentiated heavy lifting and paying only for what you use, you're really able to lower the total cost of IT and increase the agility of your organization. This stack view is a nice way to think about all the different services that Amazon Web Services offers. You'll see when we walk through the demo the complete list of services. This is a great way to categorize them. We talk about the Amazon Web Services global infrastructure, 9 different regions, over 40 edge locations. That's there for you to use. In each region, we have a minimum of 2 what we call availability zones. Availability zones, you can think of them like data centers. So it gives you redundancy as well. Within each region, you have data center redundancy. On top of that global infrastructure, we have networking. This is networking both from the perspective of into our regions. That networking is very fat, high bandwidth pipes, and we have high bandwidth between our regions. In addition, when you're actually deploying your solution into one of our regions, you can really have a lot of control over essentially what your piece of that network looks like through a capability we call virtual private cloud. And you're able to manage that in a way that it feels very natural. You have route tables and subnets and gateways, things that you're used to when you manage your networking on-premise. You can even have a virtual private cloud that you can only connect to via a VPN. By having that sort of solution, you can really have what you would consider a completely private space running within the cloud. It cannot be connected to directly from the internet. On top of that networking layer, we have compute, storage, and database. Compute is an area that we're going to look at a lot today, and that's really around the types of virtual instances, virtual machines that you can spin up and run to run your workloads. Storage, we have a number of different alternatives. Those instances often have some local storage. We also have network storage called Elastic Block Storage, and we have an object store called Simple Storage Service that actually has 11 nines of redundancy. That's a really amazing number. I don't think before I heard of S3 I had ever heard of anything having 11 nines. We also have database, and the databases start to get into what we would consider managed services. So this is a little bit at a little bit of a higher level where you say, you know what, Amazon Web Services, I want you to run this stuff for me. And in the case of our relational database service, you can actually run instances of the databases that you are familiar with, like Oracle, SQL Server, MySQL, and Postgres. We run them for you as a managed service. You tell us how much storage you need, what instance size you need, what version you want to run, and we run it for you. And we manage the backups. We manage the snapshotting, point-in-time backups. We can manage failover, so you can run failover across data centers. We manage the switchover if a failure does occur. You can copy those database snapshots cross-region, so you can have, for example, a cross-region disaster recovery plan in a very straightforward way. In addition to those databases, that relational database service, we also have a number of other application services. And application services are a higher level of abstraction where you don't really need to worry about any of the underlying execution of that service. Let's take some examples. Simple Queuing Service is our queuing service. You don't have to worry about how Simple Queuing Service scales. We will just automatically scale that for you. You just put messages in and read messages out. From your perspective, it's an infinitely scalable queue. Let's take another example. Redshift is our petabyte data warehouse service. You just spin up a cluster, you load up your data, and you're off and going. So we have a lot of those higher level application services that really run this infrastructure that is complex to maintain and create on your own. Surrounding all that, we have deployment and administration. So everything you can do can be automated. And by automated, that means you can use code and scripts in order to do it. That really helps with things like repeatability, and it also helps with agility. So while you don't have to do that, that's available, and as you mature, you'll want to automate more and more. We also have consoles to view alarms and status of everything that's going on within your systems. One piece I did want to talk about specifically is a service called Elastic Beanstalk. And I wanted to start here because it's a really great way to get up and going when you first start with Amazon Web Services and you're a developer. We have Elastic Beanstalk offering for Java, Ruby, Python, PHP, Node.js, and .NET. In a number of these cases, we actually have some tooling built into the common integrated development environments as well. For example, with Java, we have some integration into Eclipse. With .NET, we have some integration into Visual Studio. The really good thing about Elastic Beanstalk is you can build essentially a very robust, scalable application, things that use load balancers, that use auto-scaling groups, and a lot of that complexity is just managed for you by Elastic Beanstalk, as well as deployment and updates. So Elastic Beanstalk really is a platform as a service offering. If you've heard that term before, it's one option on AWS for platform as a service. We also have a few partners that do this, like EngineYard and Heroku. So is it really a great place to start if you're a developer? Amazon Web Services also has a free tier, and what's better than free? Most of our services have a free tier level of offering, and any new account that you sign up with will be good for 1 year for take advantage of those free offerings. So it's a great way to kick the tires and to experience AWS at no cost. Everything we're going to show today can be done with the free tier. And you can see more details about what services are offered in the free tier and essentially what the level of service is, how much you can use before you have to start paying at aws.amazon.com/free. So now let's get started. We're going to go ahead and set up an account. We'll actually just walk through it. We won't actually set one up, but we'll show you how to do that. We're going to go ahead and then create a public-private key pair. We'll create a security group. We'll start an EC2 instance and connect to it. We'll also create a CloudWatch alarm that will alert when our spend goes over a certain amount. We'll take a snapshot and show how to restore it, and then finally we're going to show you how to use the simple storage service at a very basic level. So if you want to sign up for AWS, you can go to aws.amazon.com. You will need a credit card, and there will be a phone verification process. And with that, let's go ahead and go to what that might look like. Okay, so here is the landing page for aws.amazon.com. And you can see here that we're scrolling through a few things. reInvent is, by the way, a great place to go learn about AWS. It's our annual conference. It's pretty technically focused. And you can see here on this page, there's a sign up button right up here. If you click on that sign up button, now let me go ahead and sign that in. So my password timed out. It took me to an identity verification by telephone page. Now, the reason why I skipped the entering my credit card information is because I am logged in with an account that is essentially already created within AWS. And you can do that. So you can take the account on which you're buying your diapers and your jewelry, and you can use that account to sign up for AWS. And if you're doing something simple like just kicking the tires or messing around with the personal site, that's a fine thing to do. If you're if you're signing it up for your business or you have a startup that's going, our recommendation is you create an account specifically for AWS. The reason is that if you use Joe's email account and Joe leaves the company, then Joe's going to live on forever within your company because he's going to be tied to that AWS account even after he's left. Or if you're a startup and you decide that you want to sell your company, you're going to give someone your email address that's tied to your private purchasing on Amazon in order to actually transition all that to them. So you really do want to create a new email address specifically for AWS if you're just getting going, and it's for anything related to your business. When you come here, you're going to go ahead and have AWS call you, and once they calls you, you then will get a verification code, and with that verification code, you'll then be able to complete the process. Okay, so once you complete the process, you'll then be able to log into the Management Console. And you just access that right up here in the corner with AWS Management Console. So we'll go there now. So remember I said that you'll get a chance to see all the services when we were back at the kind of viewing that stock diagram. Well, this are all the different services that each of these are fit into a different layer within that diagram. You can see there's lots and lots of services. Don't be intimidated when you come to this page. You don't have to use all these services. You're probably just going to start out with a couple. You're probably not going to need to use Elastic MapReduce, which is a great offering we have if you're doing anything with Hadoop for big data or Kinesis for real-time data streaming. As you get more advanced, those sort of services are going to make are probably going to be interesting to you. But until you need them, you don't need to sweat them. There's nothing on here that you have to use. The typical services people are going to get started with, RDS is our relational database service. Redshift is our data warehouse service. Those are both pretty common because they have corollaries to things people are very familiar with running on-premise. S3 is our object store. Very often that's a place that people will use early on as well. And then virtual private cloud, we're going to see a little bit more of that as we go forward. EC2, we're going to see a lot of that, which is really our elastic compute. So those are some really common places people will start. Another one is with CloudFront, and that's our edge caching service. That's where you're able to forward deploy your images and documents and really help the responsiveness of your applications. So with that, let's go ahead and go into EC2. So in this case, I'm using my personal account. The reason why I'm using my personal account here is so that you get a view that really is going to look like when you just sign up. And what you'll see, first off, one of the things I wanted to point out is you'll see I have a bunch of services listed across the top here. This is a nice feature on our console where you can go ahead and add different services to be on essentially a quick launch bar. It's really a convenient way to switch between different views. This is our EC2 dashboard page that we're looking at here now. And the way we're going to start is we're going to start with creating a key pair. Now, a key pair is used in order, in the case of Linux, to log into your Linux instance in the case of the Windows, in order to retrieve your password from Windows. So, and what it is it's an RSA public-private key pair. So we'll just go ahead and click key pair, call this demo key. By the way, key pairs are related to a particular region. So if you go to a different region, you're going to have to create another key pair for that region. So you can see when that got created, the public key got downloaded to down into AWS, but the private key is only created in the browser and here local. So there is my private key that got created. Windows is being a little bit slow on me here. Let me just go ahead and while it's doing that, I'm going to bring up temp. So we're just going to go ahead and take that demo key, and we're just going to copy that over here to the temp location. It'll make it a little bit easier to access for some operations a little bit later. So that's our key pair, and that key pair is going to be used essentially for security operations when we first access our instance. So the next thing I want to do is show you a security group. So security groups are one of the mechanisms you can use in Amazon Web Services in order to protect access to your instances. And you can think of a security group a lot like an application firewall. You really want to think of a security group as being role-based. As an example, we'll create a security group, and in this case, we're going to create it for our web servers. Right? And when you create a security group, in this case, you can see there's this virtual private cloud that this security group is going to be associated with. When I drop this down, that's all that I have here, and you'll see there's a star beside that, and it says denotes default virtual private cloud. Now, if you created your account 8 months ago and you're just going back to it, you might see something in here that allows another option called, that is related to what we call our classic offering. And classic offering runs outside of a virtual private cloud. Virtual private clouds are a really powerful mechanism for you to protect your resources and for you to manage things like network addressing. And so what we've done for all new accounts is created this capability called a default VPC that acts and behaves a lot like our classic did. And what that means is that if I want to use AWS, I don't need to worry about CIDRs and subnets and all this other stuff that VPC supports that are very powerful, but also can be a little bit intimidating when you first get started. So you don't need to worry about that when you run into default VPC. I just launch my instance and I can access it publicly. But then as you grow and you want to use capabilities of the VPC, you can use that because your instances are already running in one. So that's what a virtual private cloud is this kind of private network container that you can grow as you increase your sophistication around security and integration. So we're going to define this security group again. Web servers is in our default VPC that we're defining it. And we're going to go ahead and add a rule. And we're going to add, you can see if I select this drop-down, there's a bunch of standard rules I can add here. In this case, we're going to add a rule for a Linux web server. So we're going to add an SSH rule. We're going to open that up on port 22, and which is a standard port for SSH. And you can see I can have a custom IP, my IP, or anywhere. If I select anywhere, anywhere means that anyone can essentially get into this instance on port through the security group on port 22. If I say my IP, it's actually going to look up my IP address by my browser address, and it's going to put it in there. And just a caution, if you're running internally, it's possible that your network guys might have SSH going out on a different group, essentially, than your browser. So this, you might have a little bit of trouble, and if you use my IP and you can't connect on your internal network, talk to your IT guys. Another thing you can do is you can specify custom IP. So when you look at these address ranges, the example up here is this VPC address range. It's called a CIDR address. It has 4 numbers that look like an internet address / another number, which is like a net mask. And this is saying essentially what IP address ranges are allowed within this virtual private cloud. You can also, when you say custom IP, specify an IP address range that essentially would be your corporate IP address range. And if you did that there, what that would mean is that only someone coming from your corporate location could SSH into this instance. So it's another way to lock down, not quite as tight as your own IP address, access into the instance. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and save that, just create that. And now what we're going to do is go ahead and launch an instance. So this is our EC2 panel. We just click on that Launch Instance button right up here. And you can see there's a lot of different operating systems that we support. And if you want to just only see what you can launch for free, you can just click that free tier only there. Now, I just really quickly wanted to point out that in some cases you're going to see two different versions. Like here we have Amazon Linux and Amazon Linux. And the difference is the virtualization type. Okay, and that is a little bit small. Hopefully you can read it, but this says virtualization type paravirtual. And down here it says virtualization type HVM. HVM virtualization type is a little bit closer to the hardware. Paravirtualization is a little bit more of an abstraction layer when it comes to different virtualization approaches. So you can get some benefits out of using HVM, but not all instance types will support HVM. So both are fine, but if you need certain types of instances, you're going to want to choose the HVM. Let me just show you, for example. When you select to launch an instance, you're going to be shown this page where you select the instance type. If I click on Memory Optimize, you'll see there's a bunch of instances here that are R3. That is, R3 is the latest instance family that we launched that has a very high memory in terms of ratio, in terms of other things. And so when you buy an instance, really what you're doing is you're buying some compute. In this case, it's 32 cores, 32 virtual CPUs, excuse me. It has 244 gigabytes of memory, and it has 640 terabytes, gigabytes of local storage, right? And it's on a 10 gigabit Ethernet. So you're buying some storage, some compute, some memory, and some network. That's what you buy when essentially you buy an instance type. Those are the variables that you want to take a look at. There is this column here, is ECUs. What this is it's trying to give you a relative sense to what the processing power is of that instance. So you might see, for example, let me go back to general purpose, right? You may see some variation as you're looking at different instance types, and we'll see this when we go back to paravirtual, where we'll have the same number of virtual CPUs, but because it's using a different processor, one might have more ECUs than another. So just one other thing to keep an eye on. And you can see we also have a GPU instance type, which gives you GPU processing if you're doing some sort of high-performance computing. That is often a popular option. So let me go back here now, and we're going to go ahead and select free tier only, since we promised free tier, and we're going to launch the Amazon Linux paravirtual version. Amazon Linux is a Linux version that Amazon supports. It is based upon CentOS, and it is it essentially has a few more optimizations and some tools pre-installed. So that's a good one to support. Here's one of the ones that is not available with HVM. It's a T1 micro instance. This is the free instance, and we'll go ahead and use that one. Just to point out a case where the ECUs do vary. Here's a case where I have 2 virtual CPUs N4 and 2 virtual CPUs in 6.5. So an M3 large, which is our more modern instance, is going to perform better than our M1 large when it comes to compute. That's, again, another thing you want to think about as you're thinking through sizing your instances. So we're going to launch this T1 micro. We're going to configure the instance details. You can launch as many instances as you want. There is a limit on your account in terms of number of instances, so if you go too crazy here, we won't allow you to launch too many. There's a form you can fill out if you want to launch more, and you've been running on AWS for a little while. We will raise those limits. So you can raise limits if you find that you're running into any sort of blocking. You can also request spot instances. That's a little bit more of an advanced topic, but that's essentially a marketplace where you can buy the same instance at a cheaper price. And the caveat there is you bid on it. If you have the highest bid, if you fit within the bid, you will get it at the current market price. If we need the instance, though, or if somebody essentially outbids you and the market price goes up above your bid, you will lose your instance. We're going to take it back from you, no matter what's running on it. So you basically, in a minute, it's going to shut down. For certain types of workloads, that's fine. They're batch-oriented. You're checkpointing, that's fine. If we take that instance back at an incremental hour, you don't pay for any time within that hour. So that's spot instances. We're not going to do anything with that today. In this case, we're going to choose our VPC network. A subnet is essentially just conceptually very similar to a subnet on-premise. You can choose whether or not you want to launch into a subnet. We'll keep it simple. We're not going to choose. And we want a public IP address assigned to our instance once we launch it. IAM role is for our identity and access management. This is a powerful feature that allows you to assign rights to any software that is running on that instance in order to manipulate and use Amazon Web Service APIs. And that gets you out of having to deploy keys onto that instance. We do it for you, and we rotate it. Again, a little bit more of an advanced topic, but as you're digging deeper and deeper, you want to take a look at IAM. Shutdown behavior, when you shut down, we will either stop or terminate. By default, we will stop. Termination protection allows you to essentially adds an additional step when you want to shut something down, and that just prevents you from inadvertently shutting down something you really don't want to shut down. We have two different options for monitoring. By default, we're going to monitor at a 5-minute interval. You can switch that to more rapid monitoring, for example, at a 1-minute interval, or it is a 1-minute interval. And you would want to do that for if you are doing something like auto-scaling, where more frequent sampling is really important. Don't worry about tenancy. There is dedicated and shared. Dedicated really relates specifically to regulatory industries. If you want to see more, take a look on our site for HIPAA, and you'll understand more about what that's about. You can add storage to your instance. Again, we're sticking with the free offering, which is the micro instance. And with the micro instance, there is no local storage. We call local storage also ephemeral storage. One caution about ephemeral storage, if you're going to use it, if you stop your instance and you start it again, it's actually going to come up on a different virtual instance, right, when you do a start and stop. And you will lose anything that is stored on that ephemeral storage. So you want to be cautious about it, but there's a lot of really good use cases for ephemeral storage. I'm going to go ahead and show you that you can also add a new network attached storage. You'll see if I had a local ephemeral store, that would show up here in addition to EBS. Since instance type doesn't, it will not show up. So you can create it off of a snapshot. So a snapshot would be another volume you created previously that you want to restore. And then we can say what size we want this to be. It could be a terabyte. You have a choice of either making a standard or provisioned IOPS. Very often standard's fine. For certain types of workloads that are demanding, where you want really consistent I/O operations and you want really high throughput, you want to go with provisioned IOPS. Provisioned IOPS is essentially dedicated network attached storage. We guarantee you that a certain IOP level will be met. In this case, it relates to the size of your volume. So if I said 100, I would not be able to go up to 4,000. If I went ahead and tried to add that, and then I said next, you can see I get a warning that a maximum of 30 to 1 is permitted. But since we want to stay in the free tier, I'm going to eliminate that because that would cost us a little bit of money. Next, we're going to tag the instance. So this is our Linux demo instance. You can create new tags. So we can, for example, say environment, demo. This is something you really want to think about early on, is what tagging strategy will I use, because this will really help you manage your environment. In this case, you could either create a new security group or select an existing security group. I'm going to go ahead and select that web server security group we already created. and then I'm going to go ahead and review, and I'm going to launch this. So you can see that I have an option to either create a new key pair or use an existing key pair like we just created. And you have to acknowledge it because we want to make sure that you really have it, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to access your instance. We'll then go ahead and just say launch the instance. And now that's off and running. So I'm going to go through it really quickly one more time because I want to show you launching accessing a Windows instance. So we'll go ahead and stick to our free tier here. Let's select that guy down there. We'll put it on a T1 micro. That is fine. Same VPC. We'll just keep the default storage. Let's call this a Windows demo for our instance. We want to go ahead and then create a new security group because we do want to have RDP access, that is remote desktop access. In this case, I'm going to lock it down to my IP, and then we'll just go ahead and launch that. Same thing, in the case of Windows, we're going to use this demo key in order to retrieve our Windows password. We acknowledge that we have that and launch the instance. Okay, so now those instances are getting started. If we go back to our view instance page, we can see that it's running, but it's still going through some initialization for our Linux instance. So while that's going on, I want to talk a little bit about CloudWatch alarms. So you can see the CloudWatch alarms for your instance right down here on this tab. And all of our services pretty much have CloudWatch alarms. So these are all the different types of, CloudWatch monitoring. These are all the different types of metrics that are being measured right now on this instance that I can essentially just see for free. I can also create an alarm on this. So if I wanted, for example, say, so my alarms are going to go to my Gmail address, and whenever average of CPU utilization is greater than 80% for at least one consecutive period of 5 minutes, I want to know about that because something seems wrong on my website. Right? And right now it is insufficient data because that's just starting up. But that's how simple it is to set up an alert for you to be notified when something bad goes wrong. And as you could see, when I created that, I can create additional alarms. Right? I can actually create alarms on many different types of metrics. You can additionally, it's very simple and it's in the documentation for you to publish your own. So you might have like some queue that you're maintaining on your local instance that is important for you to monitor. You can very easily publish that as a CloudWatch metric, and then you can alarm on top of it. So it's a very powerful mechanism. One other thing you might want to take a look at is actually creating an alarm on spend. As we go to billing and cost management. So you can see I'm a big spender. I spent 86 cents so far for April. That was actually, it was 19 cents until I played around with a bunch of different services yesterday. So you can see it's pretty simple to, is pretty low cost. I can now go ahead and set up an alert. Actually, I already have here a billing alert. And let me just go ahead and delete this so I can show you how to do it from the start. Dashboard. So we'll create a billing alarm. And we'll just say when I exceed $1, so this is how you know that you have some spend going on, we'll then go ahead and notify me. Okay? Create that alarm. So that's a really easy way if you're worried about, spending money and you're not sure what's running and, you don't intend to spend any money or you want to really limit how much you are spending, these billing alerts are a great way to do that. Now I'm going to go ahead and pull up my other account because there's a little bit more interesting data. We've done some work recently with making cost analysis a lot nicer too. And one of the recent features that we've added is this Cost Explorer. I'll go ahead and launch that. So this is a really nice way for you to get a view into where is my money going. So for me, a lot on EC2. This is Redshift. I do a fair amount on Redshift. In fact, if I go back this year, in the beginning of the year, I did lots of stuff on Redshift. I was doing some testing. So nice way to really see how your spend breaks down. So that's, again, just go to your account, billing and cost, and then there's also a bunch of other reports that I don't have time to go into in order for you to get alerts and breakouts and that sort of thing. There's lots of options around understanding what you're spending. So let me go back now, and we'll go to EC2. And let's go back to our instances. You can see what happened here is that cost is actually in Northern Virginia. It changed my region. I just need to switch that back to US West. And there are my instances. So if you're not seeing what you expect, check and see whether or not you're in the right region. And we can see my Linux demo is now running. Okay, so let's go ahead and SSH into that. So there's a bunch of different ways you can connect. If you are on a Mac or you're on a Linux machine, then you probably have used SSH a lot before, and you have a native SSH client on there. SSH stands for Secure Shell. If you're on Windows, there's an open source tool called PuTTY. There's also a number of other options. You can also go ahead and launch it directly in the browser. I'm going to just go ahead and copy that. And I'm going to open up another one, which is a Git Bash shell that also has SSH support. So let me just go ahead and paste that in there. And I'm just going to go to C temp. This is where I put my page. I don't have to do a change mod because I'm on Windows. I'll go ahead and SSH into there. I get a warning that this is just telling me I haven't accessed the server before. I want to make sure that it's one that I expect. And I'm in. It's that simple. So we're going to do a yum update to install the latest changes into our Amazon instance. So we have a yum repository set up. It's going to go ahead and load all those up. So while that's happening, let's go back up here and see how it looks like our Windows instance is still going. You see this initialization check here. That tells us that it's still going at it. So we're still waiting for that initialization to come up. While we're waiting for that, let's go over and do S3. So S3 is our simple storage service, and you can see you can actually see I actually started with my wife's website, and yes, I didn't use best practice. I actually tied this to my personal account. So there you go. I'm going to go ahead, though, and create a bucket. A bucket is essentially where you put objects that you want to save in S3. And you can have up to 100 of these in your account. My demo web bucket, let's call this. Call it super. Now, this name has to be unique across all of essentially the S3 namespace. So in this case, you might get rejected, and you might have to play with that a little bit. A lot of times, if you use like your organization within the naming scheme, that's a good way to counter that. So you can see there's nothing in there. I'm going to just go ahead and upload an image. So in this case, let me go to the Amazon image and start that upload. So there it is. There's my image. Now you can also manage the properties on this image. So right now, no one but me has properties on that image. So if I took that URL, for example, and I put that into my browser, you can see that I get an access denied because I'm not authenticated in that case. So I can go ahead and add more permissions. In this case, let's give everyone the open download right. Okay. And you can do very detailed permission management on here. This is just the simplest way you would do it. You can see there I can now serve that image. So S3 can store many, many objects. A lot of times I will use the AWS command line to upload things to S3. It's a very efficient way to do it, especially if you're uploading lots of different objects. So when you, in addition to everything you see here in the console, all the things I'm doing in the console you can do through our APIs. Those APIs are offered in Java, in Python, in .NET, in Ruby, in JavaScript. We continue to add different ways for you to access our APIs. And under the covers, all those are really wrappers around our REST API. then you could use our REST API directly. So all this capability is accessible from there. We also have a really powerful command line tool, AWS CLI, that's written on our Python Boto library. And a lot of times I'll use that to copy objects up here. The PowerShell support is also very good, and I've used PowerShell quite a bit as well. So with that, let's go back now to EC2. And let's see how our instance is doing. So if you go back and see right now, okay, it looks like we have our updates all installed. So install HTTPD is the Apache web server. Oh, forgot to sudo that. And that's a pretty quick install. We'll just go ahead and start that. Okay, so now it's up and running. And so now, in theory, we should be able to go to our instance. We should be able to go to our instance and log in. So let's try that. So there's our public IP. Let's see what happens. Okay, well, it looks like it's not connecting. So a couple different things it could be. It could be local application firewall. Another thing it could be is that we got our security group wrong, which is the most typical thing. So we're going to go in here. Let's take a look at our security group. This was our web server security group. And sure enough, we don't have port 80 inbound. So you just go ahead and add a rule. And we'll make that rule for HTTP. We'll allow everywhere access. Let's go ahead and save it. Let's go back here. Let's try one more time. And there we go. So there's our Apache default web page. So let's go back one more time to our instances. And let's see. So it looks like our Windows demo instance is still going. So while that's happening, the Windows does have a little bit of a delay because of the way the password creation works. But with that, let's go back, and I want to show you the volumes associated with these instances. So you can very easily back up your volumes. All you really need to do is select it, and then go ahead and say create a snapshot. And we'll just call this our Linux demo backup. Create it. So that's started. So that's essentially doing that in the background. If we go to snapshots, we can see there it is. It's getting created. So we go back to our instances, and it looks like they might have had some demo, some unfortunate demo bad luck. Let me see if I can connect to that. So first off, we need to retrieve the password in order to log into that instance. Let's go ahead and get the password. Whoop. Try again. Pick connect. Get password. Okay, so it looks like it's still having a little bit of trouble with getting the password, so I might have to skip that step today. Just refresh it to see it comes up. Yeah, it looks like I might have to skip that step today. Let me go back to the snapshots. So that's still pending. One other thing you can do in addition to snapshots is you can also create Amazon machine images. An Amazon machine image is an exact, essentially an exact image of your running instance. And so what you would do is just here say create image. And when you create that image, generally what we'll do is shut it down, make sure everything's quiet. We'll then go ahead and create the image for you, and we will reboot. It will essentially reboot the instance. And once that is created, we don't have quite enough time to do this. Once that's created, it's going to show up under these AMIs. And when you have an AMI, you can just select that AMI and essentially launch a new instance that looks exactly like that. So if you get a base image installed, everything's on there that you need, or a standard web server, you can then, from your AMIs, go ahead and launch that instance. So that is pretty much everything that we were going to show today. I'm going to go ahead and now hand it back to Bowen.
Great, thank you, Chris. We do have lots of good questions today coming in. And while Chris is taking a look at all the questions and prepare for the live Q&A, let's see if we can run a few polls here. Okay, so the first poll is actually about what do you want to learn next. So every month we have the webinar series like what is cloud computing getting started, and also we have other topics that our internal product and solution architect team really want to know, what you try to learn from us in a virtual event format. So please take a moment and submit your vote. Okay, we'll give another few seconds. We see different opinions, and yes, I believe getting started and best practices are the two top topics people would like to learn from us. Okay, we're going to close this poll for now, and the next question is about Chris. So how effective was the presenter in today's webinar communicating the content? We will provide your feedback to Chris later after this webinar. Great. Fantastic. We're going to close this poll for now. And finally, overall, how satisfied are you with today's webinar? I'll give a few more seconds. Great. Okay, so we're going to close all the live poll for now and let Chris take a few questions.
Okay, great. Yeah, so thank you, Bowen. The first question is, I'm planning on running an Android application that needs to pull data from the web and maybe my website off it as well. So, and that was from Benjamin. Benjamin, yeah, so there should be no issues there. We actually have really strong support for mobile. It's an area of investment for us as well, so we keep on getting them better and better. So we have a really strong security story around mobile. A lot of times when you build mobile applications, you want to think a little bit differently in terms of how you build them too. Because a lot of the logic is running on the mobile application versus running on the website. And we have a lot of capabilities around things like a queuing service and around S3. They're actually really popular mechanisms for running mobile. Another one that is really popular with mobile is actually a DynamoDB. That's our NoSQL database. And very often, customers will use that as a means to post data between their mobile clients and their backends. So there are great facilities both for running your web applications and your mobile applications. I would recommend that a lot of the decisions there are more around architecture and how you might want to partition your logic that shares some of those different services. But we have a great offering when it comes to running web services as well as Android or other types of mobile applications. And I have a question from Andre. It currently takes 3 business days to process new instance requests. I think this is an automated process. I need a new type of instance for testing for a couple of hours. When will I find? When I find it's not suitable, I have to request a new one, so my optimization work takes weeks. Well, it is true that when you there are only a few types of instances that you actually need to request special access to, and part of this is also relates to how much of a reputation you have built up with AWS. So we do have some mechanisms in place to make sure that some of the instance types aren't abused by impersonators. In general, though, my experience is that the processing goes a bit faster than 3 business days, and I'm sorry if that was your experience. In general, I find that with the customers I work with, they usually receive responses on most of them within a day. And when you saw in my personal account, that's just my personal account. It's nothing special about it. You could see that I did have access to most of the instance types, and part of that is because I have a fairly well-established relationship with AWS, or excuse me, with Amazon as a customer. So there is a bit of a reputation that goes into that. I think that and I hope that in practice you'll find the response time is better than 3 days. And in general, it's not something that you will need to worry about if you're just kicking the tires. But I will certainly provide that feedback to the team. And Andre, if you want to send me some information offline at ckaiser@amazon.com, I'm happy to follow up with the services team with your feedback as well. So can you compare, contrast high-level, briefly, differences between your queuing services to IBM Q series? Would someone who knows IBM Q series feel comfortable with a Q service quickly? I think the answer to that is yes. The MQ series, while I don't have a lot of detailed experience in MQ series, I have used other queuing systems. Some of the queuing semantics are can be pretty specialized in those. I would say that Amazon's SQS offering is going to be a subset of the capabilities that you would find in something like an MQ series. For example, it does at least once message delivery. One of its main targets is to really scale out at very high volumes across essentially a distributed queue. So that doesn't necessitate some things like at least once delivery. Once and only once becomes a little bit more complicated when you're scaling out very widely. I think someone that is using MQ series would find it very comfortable and very straightforward to use SQS as a queuing service. After the first year, is the free tier no longer good? You will have to my recommendation is take a look at the details on the free tier webpage. Some of the services have essentially a free level that are around forever before you start paying. Other services will only last for that 1 year duration. So there are a lot of details around what is free and what are the restrictions around that free offering on that aws.amazon.com/free page. Can we export data from CloudWatch alarms into a spreadsheet? You can retrieve CloudWatch alarm data for the last 2 weeks through the APIs. But there is no export functionality, at least that I'm aware of at this point. We do ship very often. This is a request that I think a lot of people would like to see. I think that the team has heard about that. We ship very often. We had 280 releases last year, over 280. So I would say just keep an eye out for that one. But you can retrieve your CloudWatch metrics in a text file that you could then go ahead and put into a spreadsheet for the last 2 weeks. I'm sorry, it shifted on me a little bit here. We're currently hosting about 30 websites on a private server. We want to move all of them to the cloud. We're looking into AWS, but we don't know which product to use. Also, I would be great if we could use I'm sorry, I can't read that, plus panel, I think it says, and I'm not familiar with what that is. So that part I won't be able to answer. But in terms of moving servers to the cloud, there's a number of different options there. If those servers are already running in the virtual environment, we can both import Windows hypervisor-based images, and we can also import VMware images. It does depend upon the operating system you're running. We can do Windows and Red Hat and a few others. I would recommend that we do have a detailed page on import-export. If you take a look in that detailed page, you will find the specific restrictions around import-export. That's what I would recommend you doing. If you're running physical environments, some of the vendors like VMware do have also tools for you to take those physical physical servers and turn them into images, which you could do, and then import those images into AWS. I noticed a warning earlier that the CloudWatch might incur charges. Would these simple examples cost? These simple examples, everything I showed will cost you no money. You incur charges when you go from the 5-minute monitoring to the 1-minute monitoring. And the most typical case you're going to want to do that is when you're using auto-scaling. Auto-scaling will automatically create and remove instances for you. And because of that, you would really want to make sure that you're being relatively responsive. So the auto-scaling is the most common reason why you would go to that 1-minute increment. And I have a question from Michael. I want to launch a web application, but I also run a web design business on AWS on the side. You can certainly, you can run many different types of workloads, and web is just one example of what I showed. One of the real beauties of AWS is that we have many different operating systems. We have many different versions of Linux. We have many different instance types, and so we can really handle the vast majority of workloads that you would be running on-premise. You can just install the software, assuming that your licensing allows it, onto AWS and run them within AWS without any problems. And I think I am out of time. There's a lot more questions here, and I'm sorry, and a lot of them are great questions, and I'm sorry that it looks like I have ran over. I think I'm probably going to need to go ahead and stop now. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it back to Bowen.
Great, thank you, Chris. Yes, we do have lots of questions, and we were going to go through the list of questions and assign them to appropriate parties within Amazon Web Services, and hopefully we can get back to you with a good answer. And great, thank you everyone for joining us today, and we had a great attendance today. Lots of great feedback will help us improve our webinar programming. So thank you everyone, and have a great rest of the day.